Let's go to your favourite area, Rich. I think you've been banging on, frankly. Franklin banging on. There's a play on words there. But you've been talking actively as a great champion for water safety in regional and rural communities. You've published some research just recently as well with Danielle Taylor, a PhD student, I believe now. So give us your take on what city folk are not hearing in relation to regional and remote drowning prevention.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things in this, as I was talking about before. I mean, one of them is that we know that the rates go up as you go more remotely. And so there's some real challenges with that from a population perspective. And we talked a little bit about like the pool fencing stuff previously. Enforcement around this is challenging, you know, if you do have rules or regulations that are in place. But there's a lot of water bodies out in rural areas, from small farm dams through to big kind of, you know, water bodies that are used for supplying water to towns, through to little creeks that turn into raging torrent rivers when we get a bit of flooding that comes through, you know, as part of that process. And you know, what we've got this challenge with some skill shortages out in rural areas, including that, we talk about this one for professional development. How do we do that in a way where, you know, you might only have one or two people that need that's, you know, financially viable, that encourages them to continue to develop their skills? How do we deal with this kind of, you know, seasonal pool issue? So, you know, I now look in Sydney and Brisbane, most of the pools are now all year round. You know, there's very few that now close down during kind of the winter months, whereas in rural areas, that's still a common activity. So you got a number of part of the year where people can't even get into a pool for aquatic activities and use. And then we've got to think about, you know, some of these challenges with low pool usage and how do we get more people in? How do we work with the local government to make them real focal points within the community that encourage water safety, but all the other things that we love about these pools, recognizing that a number of them are aging as well, and the challenges about, you know, maintaining kind of these aging pools, and then thinking about how do we work with people that are in very remote locations that, you know, that they're on properties and these kids just want to have fun and be out there, but we want to try and keep them safe as part of it. And then the diversity that we're seeing coming through. So, you know, we do have, you know, large pockets of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that are in remote communities and in regional and rural areas as well. We're starting to see a lot more migrants being moved into those locations initially. And so we've got some real challenges then with how do we deal with those as part of it. And then this diversity of activity. You know, we've got people that are out there water skiing, we've got people that are out there swimming in them, we've got people that are doing fishing and other sorts of activities around these rural and remote locations. So I mean, I think it's really important because I think, you know, our rural population, you know, is key for what we do. And unfortunately, we see higher rates. So how do we protect them and look at it? I think it's a real challenge, especially that we also don't know what works. You know, we're assuming that the same things that we do work. So signage, you know, from a road safety perspective works because we enforce it. Signage on a beach works because we enforce it. How does that work then in locations where we've got nobody enforcing it or looking at it? How do we then deal with some of the challenges about people camping near some of these sites and keeping them safe? What does that look like for those that are then visiting these locations as well? So I think the rural remote area for me, like there's some things that we know. We know that they're drowning in rivers and lakes. You know, we know that we've still got an issue with young people. We know that there's some strategies like safe play areas on farms that we'd like to see them get there, but we're not there as part of that sort of process. We know that we'd like to see more life jacket use, particularly on the large lakes as part of that process again. How do we make that happen? How do we make that being part of what you do? We know that we've got some real challenges around that. So I think it's an area where there's a lot that needs to be done. There's some things that we know should be done as part of it. And how do we make that happen in, I think, you know, a cost-effective way? We've got a lot of great volunteers out there, but how do we make sure that they're well supported as part of that process as well?
It sounds like a massive area, actually. When you describe it like that, you've almost described the full water safety strategy, but contextualized to regional and remote communities. So a big challenge. So you're involved in some research with Amy and others recently that actually identified a stakeholder that we haven't pestered on water safety. So what's the role of the water authorities here?
Yeah, look, I think they do have a role in this because they own the water. I mean, you know, essentially they're the owners of these water bodies. They decide who can come and use it or not use it from that perspective, or when it can and can't be used. So again, I think that they're a key partner. They also are part of the group that maintain the roads and areas that give you access to it. So if you look at some of our other strategies, and again, I'm just taking the beach as an example, we put up signage as you go along. It's really, now we'll see signage as you come into the car park. So hopefully you're making a decision about whether it's patrolled or not patrolled, about where some of those dangers or things might be in those locations. So I think we need to do a lot more with them about that communication part of it. Maintenance of those signs is really critical. And I think we need to be thinking some of the new things, this Internet of Things, where we can actually change these signs based on the dangers that are occurring. And so there's a little bit of work now looking at remote sensing when it comes to flooding and being able to close boom gates, etc., without there needing to be a person that goes out and pulls them down and puts signs up, and that they then, when the water goes down, they disappear again. Because again, if you've just got something that's there all the time and it's not a risk at a particular time, people then just think it's just part of the fabric or part of what's kind of going on. And some of that same challenges that, again, if we use road safety, using that 40 kilometres an hour signage around schools, we take it down. We have flashing signs to let you know when it's in action, and then it goes. Same with flooding, same with other sorts of risks that might be there as part of that sort of challenge. So I think we do need to work with them. I think the other group is the National Parks Authorities as well. They're doing a little bit of stuff, but again, how do we bring them more into the tent? How do we help them understand the risks, and how do we work with them about what actually works? They're much stronger in the US around some of these water safety bodies, and so learning some of the lessons out of the US and how we can transpose that into the Australian setting will be really powerful.
It's a good point. I don't know. My hunch is that there's a legal framework in the US around parks and wildlife and the roles and responsibilities and the fear of litigation. There might be something in that. I do think we've got to find a way to draw national parks and also the water authorities into the drowning conversation, make friends with them to see whether we can have an impact. Stacey, it strikes me that there's some overlap here with this idea of community partnerships with some of the earlier comments that you made in relation to migrant communities. So what does this look like in a community partnership model?
I think we've touched on this actually throughout all of the populations that we've talked about today, but I guess my area around multicultural and migrant areas, Richard said that the settlement support or the settlement strategies are actually moving new arrivals into these regional areas who perhaps are not so familiar with our waterways. So it is bringing in, I think, a range of partners, looking at, as Richard said, bringing in the water authorities, but also the health and settlement support agencies and things like that as well. So I think we do need to start looking beyond not just the drowning and water safety sector, but we need to bring in all these other partnerships from outside the sector, regardless of what age group we're looking at. Regional remote areas obviously have people who are aged across the lifespan. So we're really focusing on how do we, provide the services in these remote and rural communities that can target all of the age groups and all of these different backgrounds. And by that, we need to be including health, education, settlement support, national parks and wildlife. So I guess for me, it would be looking at a model where we've got a range of different partners on board, a range of different stakeholders, looking at drowning prevention and potentially local water safety planning. Right, and we might build on that concept in future webinars. Thank you. We should acknowledge just that the FarmSafe were actually on the panel, but there was a clash when we changed the date. So ordinarily we would have a FarmSafe voice in the discussion, and they add significant value across partnerships in regional communities.